the sound therapy work that I do and the area that I've worked in has been mainly with very difficult illnesses, those which the doctors can do nothing more with, people with all kinds of weird and wonderful syndromes that have only appeared 5 times in the world, that kind of stuff. And I discovered with many, many of them, specifically with multiple sclerosis and Parkinson's disease, which I worked extensively with in Germany, that at that stage in time, people were looking for me to fix things. Like a doctor, you go to a doctor for a pill and they fix it, or they do what they can. And one of the most important things I discovered was that people with that mentality were not willing to look into the mind. They were not willing to look at where the problem started, i.e. where the disease began, and they didn't really acknowledge that the emotional causes of illness. Well, I think probably everybody in the room is familiar with the emotional causes of illness, and we can see in everyday life brilliant examples of that, i.e. businessmen who get stressed usually have ulcers, or they have high blood pressure, or due to the lifestyles and whatnot, they can get sick. But what about the more subtle things? What about MS that seems to strike people suddenly? And how about the emotional things behind that? And so I decided that I would turn my attention to the mind. And going right back to when I was 12 years old, I have had a particular rapport with hypnotherapy. I found myself doing it as a child without really knowing what it was I was doing, much to the horror of all the other kids that I did it on. And again, some, 20, 25 years ago, I rediscovered in the garage a whole pile of stuff that I'd done on hypnosis back in the 80s, when I'd actually followed a chap who was doing a postal course. Everything went through the post then, of course, no email. And so I finally decided that I would go and really look into hypnotherapy, and it was a decision that was made just like that when I was in Hawaii at the last seminar I did. And I thought to myself, the last piece of the jigsaw with sound, the last piece to really scoop everybody into the net and to help people who are open and willing to really not just put a sticking plaster on their problem, because many of the people I dealt with, if I could get them to a stage where they could walk okay and they'd be talking okay, they wouldn't go any further, and they would be totally reliant on sound. So I wanted to go that extra mile and suggest then to people that we now look at where this started and how it all began. Let's have a look at your life. So the subject that I've started off with is, are you of sound mind? Are you balanced and healthy? Many of us would like to think we are, yes. But everything comes down to, and links in with what Robert was talking about this morning, is how you perceive your reality and how you create your reality, how you judge things. Do you look at something and say, oh, that's terrible? Or do you look at it and say, oh, well, there are other sides to it? Or do you just say, well, it just is, and you don't let it touch you? I mean, we've heard people say before, don't fight against war, campaign for peace. Because where in the Huna philosophy, they say, energy goes where attention flows. And it's very, very true. Whatever you focus your attention on becomes your reality. So if you're focusing on fighting the good fight against war, then that becomes your reality. The war becomes a reality. The struggle and the fight becomes a reality. Whereas if you focus your attention on promoting peace, that's an entirely different area altogether. So where does sound come into this? Well, the whole thing is based on who you are as a person and how you see the world. And if you're full of health and you're balanced and your sounds are good, and I'm talking about your internal tones, then you probably see the world in a very positive light. But if you're out of balance and there are stresses, you probably react without thinking, and that's an important thing, thinking. So if you think of your life as going okay, and being in a continual stress, that is what shapes your reality. The conscious and the subconscious mind. I've been doing this, working on this with the hypnotherapy, and very, very interesting it was too. Now, for ease of communication, we all probably know that we refer to left brain and right brain. That's, you know, there's a huge bone of contention about what it is, but for the purposes of talking today, I will talk about the left logical brain and the right intuitive side of the brain. And the left logical side of the brain is what perceives problems and will spend all night worrying you to death trying to fix them. And it's what keeps you awake at night. So, what is your right mind? What's the right mind to be in? You've heard people say, oh, if I was on my right mind, who in their right mind would go to war? So what is the right mind? The right mind is a balanced mind. And within our physical and mental makeup are trillions of frequencies all working at the same time. And I'll go on to explain about that later on. And everything from the outside affects us. It sounds like we were hearing the alarm sounds outside earlier on. Some of us did, some of us didn't. People that we interact with, family relationships and so on. Everything affects us. And the key, really, is to be aware that it does. Because most of us are unaware. So, talking about this, how do you judge things personally? If you all think to yourself, how do I look at things? Do I think, well, some things are good, some things are bad? Do you ever put yourself in other people's shoes? And I'm talking about other people such as the President of America. How do you think, if you want to see why he's responding the way he responds to certain things, close your eyes and just place yourself in his shoes and think about all the influences he's got from the advisors and whatnot, and his family and all that kind of stuff. Ignore the media, because the media always puts a slant on everything the way they want to. But you have to reality check periodically and look at everything from the fors and the againsts, and then take the overview and look at any given situation, even in your life with relationships and so on. Say you're having an argument with your spouse or your partner. Take a moment to stand in their shoes and look at yourself and the things you're saying. And then take another moment to stand outside of the two of you, metaphorically speaking, and look at the two of you who might be arguing or having a disagreement. And try and see that reality. Try and look at reality from all angles. This is a step towards making us more balanced individuals and not so easily swayed by any emotion from here, there, or everywhere, and not responding from an unthinking mind. Now, I'd like to just clarify here. You know, I said about the left brain is logical and does all your thinking for you, and the right brain is the intuitive subconscious mind. Well, the subconscious mind holds all your passion. And actually the conscious mind is the one that says, no, don't go overboard here, just hold back. Or sometimes when the subconscious mind is too much in power, especially if you're a very emotional person, it will run steamroller over the conscious mind, and this is when you explode, you blow up and you get really angry, and you become anger. You don't just feel the anger, you become the anger. And this is so much of a problem in today's society, that our left brain, right brain, conscious, unconscious minds are not controlled. We're not controlled enough. And one of the things that I think is paramount for us all to do is to learn to control our emotions, not to not have any emotion. You know, when I talked about it's not good, it's not bad, it just is. That doesn't mean you don't have feelings about things, you don't have emotions. It just means that you don't go overboard one way or the other. You use your emotions when you choose to in a refined and controlled manner. And everything here has to do with frequency and sound and how you manage it. How you don't allow it to run riot over you, but you are master of your own self. This is self-empowerment. This is being master of your own destiny. So, as I was saying, what's sound got to do with it? Well, sound is the most magical and yet unnoticed part of our lives. Everything, as you probably may know, in this universe and beyond vibrates. And as Robert was talking about, you know, from the Bible, in the beginning was the Word, in the beginning was light. It's all frequency, and as such can be measured. This is where the scientist bit comes in. They say, aha, we know the frequency of light, we know where the colour spectrum is, we know what radio waves are, and so on and so forth. But what about what's in your body? And what about how can we measure it to help you to stay healthy? I've put a little bit here about sound retraining. You can use the method that I use, which is using very, very specific sounds to you. Each individual person will have different sounds to the person next to you to tackle long-standing and difficult illnesses. Now, although I've made that my speciality, sound can deal with pretty much everything right across the board. But there are some things that do need a real elbow. They do need a real nudge. And those are the things that are buried very, very deeply, that the mind and body doesn't want to give up readily, which is where hypnosis comes in, providing the person that you're working on is willing. And they both complement each other and will help you to change and resolve almost any problem. Now, I find my particular niche with hypnosis is taking people back in time, because with the illnesses that I work with, I always like to go back to where it started. And then let's go to just before it started. What were you doing? Who was in your life? What happened? Was there a trauma? And sometimes, although it's hotly contested, past lives. You know, you may all agree in past lives, I certainly do. But working in the field of clinical hypnotherapy, past lives has a big no-no on it. So I can speak to you openly here. But for me, going into the past, however far it is just going into the past. It's going to see where an event happened, an emotional event happened, that changed your structure, your cellular memory, your body chemistry, your pattern of thoughts, and your pattern of sound. Each of us are born with a sound fingerprint. And I believe, even though scientists and other very learned people hold their hands up in horror when I talk about astrology, but astrology is very, very linked to sound. As you know, sound will register on a musical scale, and Kepler was great in talking to us about the movement of the planets and forming the chromatic scale and so on and so forth. Well, anyway, clever people out there have devised scales that match with birth dates and so on, and I personally use the Pythagorean scale, which is much earlier than the normal musical scale of A at 440, which some people use today. Because I believe, that the A at 440 to me is an artificial scale. Any of you know about music? Yes, I expect you do. And so I prefer to change it slightly. And I have found the reason I use it is because it does get better results. Here are a few facts. Every thought that you think and emotion that you feel has a sound frequency. Every muscular action that you take emits a frequency. So when you're walking around, when you're talking, all these little facial muscles that move when you smile or laugh, you're emitting into your energy field a pattern of frequency which can be read. And this is very often what psychics and clairvoyants read. Some read the external energy, and they can tell because there's a pattern of what you've done maybe in the last 24 hours or the last 24 weeks. In your energy field, it's like it's an energetic memory as opposed to a cellular memory, because you are emitting who you are and what you've done all the time. So everything around you has a frequency that translates into sound, whether you can hear it or not. And believe me, I only work with a small portion of the sound spectrum, and there's so much more that goes far beyond what anybody knows anyway. I mean, here we are on planet Earth, what do we know? You know, there are frequencies that go on probably ad infinitum. So when something dramatic occurs, so if I suddenly said, look out the window!
You do stand that
Sorry.
way. That's all right, you do, you proved the point.
Yes, all your attention went over there, and plus I was going to do a little example of, if, say for example you'd hit your thumb with a hammer and there was a pain. Now in that second, when I distracted you, your focus of attention was not on the pain. So in that split second, all cognition of pain disappears. And this is actually an underlying theory with hypnosis, that we can produce things like they call glove anesthesia, or we can divert the mind away from the pain in order to give you respite. This is how we do pain control. But it's also, I've just imprinted that into your psyche now, because you'll probably, when you talk about this talk afterwards, you'll say, cool, that Nav made me jump when she shouted. You see, because it does. And that, again, is the way that children get imprinted. When a mother shouts or gives them a smack, it's a form of hypnosis. It's taking their complete attention, and their logical mind shuts for a second, and the subconscious mind comes up and wham, it registers. And especially, sadly, if the mother says something detrimental to the child. That's the beginning of a pattern that the child learns and will use throughout their life. So, what have I written up there? Yes, you're reacting automatically. I think I heard on the internet a while ago. So again, this comes back, your body moves and responds, you all jumped before you've even thought about it. And this is part of what I've been talking about when it comes to being aware, being conscious of how you respond. Now I can't say that, I would probably take a bit of learning for you to not react if somebody came in shouting fire or whatever, because it's a programmed response. But I am talking about us as a human race learning to be balanced, learning to balance our frequencies, learning to not be knocked off of our balance by the input from outside. You are basically, if you're out of control, and I use that loosely, i.e. not in control of the way you respond to things, you're shaping your own reality in a way that you don't want your reality to be like that. You don't want to be awake every night worrying about things. You want to be balanced and calm. Which way am I going? Yes. So, now with this very specific sound healing that I do, I can quite confidently say that we have indexes of all muscular frequencies, chemical frequencies, you name it, organ frequencies. All the systems are governed by sound. For a presentation like this, I put scale from C to B on the thing, and I talked to you about all the areas that sound will influence. For example, the note of C influences the big and thick muscles in the body, the basic body structure. It also relates to the base chakra. Many of you probably know that. And also to the blood and to the muscle of the heart. C sharp is all about fertility. It comes up to the second chakra. And if you're looking at someone who has problems becoming pregnant, or has endometriosis or fibroids or anything to do with lower abdomen problems, it will be a problem with C sharp in their body. D goes on to govern the organs such as the pancreas and the spleen and so on. It's also the area where all the hormones are, like testosterone and estrogen, DHEA, those kind of things. And of course everything works in tandem, so if you have one part of it missing, then it's like having a railway line that goes from A to B, and in the middle the bridge is out. So everything stops where the bridge is out. I'll just run through them all for you. D sharp has everything to do with digestion, the colon, processing things, letting things go from the past. E is to do with the emotional aspect of the heart, the chest, the lungs area. So you find people with emphysema, lung problems, all have a problem with E. And interestingly enough, E is something that you find that's very much in stress, either overabundant or underabundant, with someone who has deeply emotional problems or marriage problems or stuck in their life. You'll find someone, say for example, you're in a marriage that is no longer serves you, and you want to move on, but you can't, you just don't know where to go or what to do or how to do it. You will see in that person's voice always an overabundance of E, because the heart is like a log jam. And I'm talking about the emotional heart here. And the answer to that is to give the opposing frequency, which is A sharp. And A sharp represents, on an emotional level, expression of the self, being able to speak up for yourself, being unafraid to do what you want, and so on. And sometimes when you balance it, the person who has been stuck in a relationship like that is able to move on. You will also find as an extreme of A sharp, I'm just jumping ahead here to A sharp, this is where 99.9% of all children with ADHD and problems in that, hyperactive, so on, their A sharp is off the scale. They have nothing else down in the bottom area, but the A sharp is wild. So just very quickly going on, you come into F, which has everything to do with the kidney and the prostate and letting things go. It also governs your processing and filtering system in the body, along with F sharp. And you'll find that in the center of a chart where F and F sharp are, this is where all the stressor chemicals are. This is where the adrenaline is, where the cortisol is. So business people, or people who lead a very, very stressed life, have a big peak in their voice around F and F sharp. And of course next to that is G, and G is the note, and G and G sharp together, that govern mental problems. So when the adrenaline and the cortisol go up, because you live a very stressed life, the G comes up with it, and in there is also thyroxine, hyperactive thyroid and so on. You will find that these are the people that can't close down. They have to take sleeping pills. They have high blood pressure because their voice is high in this area, and of course the balancing area that goes with that, which is C sharp and D, affects all their endocrine system and their hormones and so on and so forth, so you're completely shocked. Now you also find in G and G sharp, when they're very, very high, you also find medical problems such as manic depression, schizophrenia, that kind of thing. Now, when the G and the G sharp is very, very low, you get a different kind of depression. You get apathetic depression. When you have a person who just sits in a chair or won't get out of bed, doesn't want to wash, that kind of thing, they have what I call a depressed depression. And 9 times out of 10 you have to look at body chemistry, lifestyle, all that sort of stuff. Going on through G sharp into A and A sharp. A is all about A and A sharp is all about your immune system. Also, A is the keynote that is generally out of whack when you have people with HIV. They have problems with their immune system. And A sharp is also where epilepsy comes in, always a problem with A sharp. And interestingly enough, if you know enough about medical drugs and medication, you will find that, for example, phenobarbital, the drug is in A sharp. And lots and lots of the fertility drugs resonate at C sharp, the ones that they give you for this problem here. So I can look at the drugs and see whether it's a really good match or whether it's almost there or just off target, and see why these drugs work, and sometimes why they don't work, why it's just a one-off effect. In fact, I have a very, very, very interesting thing that I'd like to just share with you right now. And it has to do with a study that I was looking at some months ago on catatonia. Now, you all know what catatonia is?
No.
Yeah. Catatonia is when the body appears to be frozen. The person inside is alive and well, but the body sits there all day. They don't move. They are undirected. They seem to have no control over no knowledge of what's going on outside. There was that wonderful film, anybody remember what it was, with Robert De Niro and...
the man who lost his hat or something.
Yeah, that's the book by Oliver Sacks, but Oliver Sacks was the man who actually did this thing, and he found by giving... Awakening, that's the film. He found that by giving them dopamine that they would wake up. And he found that people also responded to music. So they would sit there in a frozen state all day and still be locked mentally in whatever time it was when they actually went into that state. So they might wake up and still think it was 1940 or 50. But this recent study that I was just very interested in was carried out by members of the Royal Surrey Hospital, and they were dealing with people with catatonia. But the one thing that they found, obviously because they were in this fixed state, that they didn't sleep. They could get them into bed, providing they steered them and, showed them how to walk to get back into bed. But they didn't sleep, they were awake all night, eyes glazed and whatnot. So they started, on top of all their other medication, giving them zolpidem or Ambience, which is an American medication for, it's a sleeping pill basically. And to their surprise, these people, 20 minutes after they'd taken the zolpidem, woke up. And nobody knew why. But they would only stay awake. And when I say awake, I'm talking about their consciousness came back. They would only stay awake for half an hour, and then it would subside. And of course, you can't give people sleeping pills all the time or every half an hour because you'd kill them in the end.
What happened to Michael Jackson?
Exactly. So I thought to myself, the way my mind was, I thought, right, what is it that they're giving to people? What is it they're giving them that's triggering this effect? Now, I happen to have done a bit of research on glutamates, and I'm talking about glutamine and glutathione. And these are just straightforward amino acids. You can buy them over the counter, but they do clean your body and clean your brain. They detox you, basically. And I noticed when I worked out I looked at the chemical formula for Ambience, and I noticed that when you worked with it, you divided it down, it was the same frequency as glutathione. So I thought to myself, aha, so what's happening here? And my supposition was that when the zolpidem went into the body, zolpidem is a compound, so there's a mixture of 2 or 3 things going on there. And by the time it gets into the digestion, it hits the body at the frequency of the combined elements in there. But then it gradually breaks down, and that frequency that it went in at is lost. So this, I deduced, is why the frequency worked immediately and then wore off after half an hour. And
Why? Because I missed that.
why the frequency worked immediately, you know, given just time to get in there and get into the system, and why it wore off after half an hour. But let me just tell you about something that I usually present when I talk about my sound therapy. And I'll talk to you about a gentleman that was brought to me with clinical dementia. And he was at the stage where his wife and family could no longer manage him. I.e., he couldn't get up and walk on his own. He couldn't communicate apart from 1 or 2 words. He had pretty much no control of his mouth. He drooled, couldn't feed himself, and so on. So she was very, very sad and felt that she had to hand over his care to a nursing home. So happened to be on the radio, and she phoned me up and said, well, you know, I've got nothing to lose. And I thought, well, neither have I can see this man, and I'll see what I can do. Now, when he came, there were various factors. When he came, it took 4 of them to carry him into my office, and he sat in an armchair before I put him on the couch and tested him with sounds. Now, the first important factor with this gentleman was I needed to look at what happened before he started to go into this state of dementia. And this had happened 8 years before. And there were 2 or 3 things that had happened that were important. First of all, he'd gone into hospital and had his gallbladder removed. And whilst he was in hospital, they found an aneurysm, which they repaired at the time. So he had quite a shock to his system. He had anaesthetic and so on and so forth. Now, this man previously was a very strong, he was a builder. So he spent all day laying bricks, shoveling cement, and a very, what I would call a plain and ordinary man. But he didn't, he wasn't the sort of man that was overconfident. He had very little confidence in himself. Now, his birthday, and this is going back to the astrology, happened to be in the note of G, was a Scorpio. And in fact, on the cusp between Scorpio and Sagittarius. So that's a very important point, because remember what I said to you about G and G sharp? If there's no energy there, then it affects the mind. Okay, that's the first thing to remember. And secondly, I asked his wife what had happened, and she said, well, for the first year after he'd had these operations, I noticed that his memory was getting bad. He used to forget things, and you know, but he still kept on working and so on. And then gradually, after a period of 2 years, when he started to get very slow in his movements, that was when he was diagnosed with clinical dementia, and then the following 6 years was the progression gradually worse. So one of the most important neurotransmitters in the brain is acetylcholine, and another one is GABA, which is gamma-aminobutyric acid. And both of these chemicals are involved with allowing the brain to work properly and allowing the memory to be good and so on. And a correlation was that his birthday sound, his sense of self, was very, very close to these frequencies. And as I said before, when you are traumatized by something, your voice kind of bunches up into one area. This is like the stress area here. And then, see in this particular chart I've got here, there's no sound or hardly any sound, no energy at all over there. And what had happened with this gentleman was, I think due to the traumatic effect of the operation and so on and so forth, and his own personal makeup to start with, he had developed a huge empty space here, Well, what that does, when you're not generating the sounds within you, you're not allowing those chemicals that rely on those sounds to kind of sit on them and help them to work. They get lost. It doesn't happen. It's like the bridge being out just there. So what I did with this man, I asked his wife, all he could say to me was A, B and C, and that was only when his wife prompted him. So I managed to get a very small recording of his voice, but I found that his voice was entirely empty and basically his voice was full up. The only tone I could get was over there. So not having an awful lot of data, I used the research that I'd done on some of the chemical problems that they know about dementia, using acetylcholine and using the frequency of GABA on various octaves, and I fed it back to him on the couch. Now, when I'm treating someone on a couch, if they're non-responsive, like I've had children who are non-vocal or autistic or that kind of thing, I look for symptoms and signs. I look for twitching or itching. I look for calmness where they were hyperactive before and so on. And I noticed that this chap who had actually gone to sleep on the couch started to scratch his legs. And I thought to myself, I think he's tingling. He's having a response to these sounds. Anyway, long and short, without going into too much detail, I found some sounds that he responded to, and one in particular, the GABA. When I put this sound and left it on for 10 minutes because I could see he was responding, he actually sat up on the couch and spoke his first sentence for 2 years. And he looked at his wife and said, "Don't you think we should go home? It's time to take the dog out." Mind you, he looked at his wrist, there was no watch on there, and he made the action to look at the time, even though he didn't have a watch on. But it took less people to get him out of my office than it took to bring him in. And his wife and his son, who was there at the time helping with him, his son took 3 days off of work because he couldn't believe what was happening. And I had him on the sound 24 hours a day. This man, within 2 days, was walking, talking, and within a week he was able to dress himself, and within a fortnight he was pretty much functioning. And now I'm not saying that his Alzheimer's had gone away, but what I had given him back was awareness of himself, the ability to dress himself and speak in a rational manner to his wife, so his wife could at least say, "Are you in pain? Do you want to go to bed now?" And he could answer her. And he was effectively, I'd given her back in her husband a quality of life that she could deal with and live with for as long as he went on. So I know for sure, without any shadow of a doubt, and I've had thousands of cases in different areas, that you can hit the right frequency of a chemical in the body and it will bridge the gap. I've seen it work with autistic children who are completely wild, and I have actually played that frequency of GABA, which is something which calms the body, and seen them stand stock still. I had one autistic child that I spent the whole session trying to stop him climbing out the window. And the only time he would freeze and stand still was when that frequency was on. In fact, what he did was then he tried to put his face inside the speaker. I had a speaker that looked like a cannon, which I've still got now, and he put his head right into the thing and he just stayed there with this frequency, almost drinking it in. It was amazing. So that's my experience of dementia. Now, I'm not saying that every case is the same. Vascular dementia is probably slightly different. I haven't looked into that. But I know that you can also stimulate oxygen in the body. You can also stimulate the brain to make new pathways. And you can also, by giving sound at a brainwave level, which is where this works, it makes little bridges. The sound will make a bridge for the other chemicals to jump across. The little numerical chart you saw is just one thing that I do. I also do a spectrograph voice analysis, and the numbers chart that you saw there gives me an overall picture of your life in general from as long back as you care to. And the spectrograph chart takes a snapshot of how you are today at that moment. So if you had you know, a lot of vitamin C for breakfast, I would see it as a chemical peak in your body. If you have a pulled muscle in your leg, I would see it in that chart. So I identify chemical and muscular deficiency, and then I calculate tones to give back to you. And these tones are very, very low tones. They're like a cat purring. And I attempt to retrain your brain. I retrain your brain to listen to those sounds. And the point is, you don't have it all the time and then get fed with it, because your brain will reject it in the end. If something, it's like when somebody goes on it, you say, okay, I've got it, don't keep on. That's what happens with sound. You listen, it's like taking a bite of cake. You eat it, you don't immediately shovel down another one. You wait and see how your body responds. And then if it forgets what the cake was like 2 days later, you have another mouthful. So that's what you do with the sounds. Now I've gone on to do this further training. I also can support, and I'm very, very pleased to be able to do this with hypnotherapy. And this is clinical hypnotherapy, which deals with all kinds of everything from past life to phobias of spiders and fear of flying and smoking and all that kind of stuff. But my particular niche, my area of interest, is uncovering past events that have gone or got laid in place that have begun your illness or your problem, whatever it is. And then you go back there and change and reframe it, look at it a different way, step into a different position. I use all kinds of methods to help you be free and to change your response pattern. And then I also teach you how to be self-empowered, how to be in control of your body, how to choose what you want to do. And then you also have to, you know, another thing is to how do you look at your life? Do you look at it from a negative point of view or and a positive point of view? And so many people, bless them, say, oh, well, I'm always very positive. But a good thing to do is to carry a little tape recorder around with yourself and record what it is you actually say to people. Because we're on automatic pilot so often, and we'll grizzle on about the weather or say, oh, did you see what was in the paper today? La, la, la. When, if you take my guy, I haven't had a newspaper or watched the stuff on the television for 20 years, because energy goes where attention, or energy flows where attention goes. So if you constantly read the gubbins in the papers, you're constantly giving your precious life energy in dribs and drabs to that particular thing. And, you know, whilst I don't advocate that you go and be a monk and stand on top of a mountain, I do say, get some balance. And what you want to have more of in your life, put your attention there. So if you want a beautiful garden, put your attention there. Love the flowers. You know, do that. If you want a good relationship, don't say, oh, well, he always does that and it drives me. You cannot change other people. You can only change yourself. Because ultimately, you know, that's why you came down here, to learn life lessons, to keep yourself balanced and to raise your vibes. So that next time you come down, you don't have to do the same garbage all over again. So awareness is absolutely, and the results of being aware and paying attention, and when you feel miserable, fed up, or a bit depressed, or you feel overexcited, just sit for a second and have a look and say, why do I feel like this? What's just happened? You know, what's going on with me? Do a little bit of self-analysis, because what goes on in your mind affects your body. It hits your chemicals faster than grease lightning. It affects your organs and the way you work, whether you're constipated or whether you have diarrhea, whether you have a headache or you have a toothache. Everything affects that. And when you start to become aware on a daily basis and you start to look at these things, don't expect to be perfect in 2 seconds, but when you start to look at it as it comes up, then you will see the results in your physical, emotional health, the choices you make, the direction, your relationships, your lifestyle, your friends and your work. In fact, everything will change. And you have to be prepared sometimes to think to yourself, oh, actually, I don't like where I work anymore. I don't want to be with these people. You know, and only have to look out there now, and thousands of people are doing it. People who've been in the stock market all their life, or they're out raising chickens. And it's not the old paradigm of, like it used to be, like, oh, going all hippie and new age. It's really following your heart and saying, I want to wake up to the birds every morning. I want to care for things and have fresh eggs. And let's embrace it. You know, let's all embrace it and have the courage to go with that. Those people that have difficulties with that, or they're stuck, or health problems, that's where I come in. Because I work with sound and I work with hypnotherapy now, and I can see probably several of the people who worked with me will probably be hot on my heels learning how to do it too. Because my pleasure in life is to help people and to say, look, you know, I've done it, you can do it too. That's my pleasure. That's what makes my heart sing, to be able to see an autistic child change and be responsive to the parent. Even if I can't immediately give it back everything that it needs to be normal. I mean, I also believe that sometimes children with those kind of problems come in to teach the parents very valuable lessons. You know, I am aware of all that stuff, but just like the guy with dementia, just to be able to give her, that lady, her husband back, and be able to communicate with him for, you know, the following 2 years. And interestingly enough, that gentleman very sadly died 2 years afterwards. He caught pneumonia. They took him into hospital, took away his sound, and put him on heavy steroids and medication, and within 3 weeks he was dead. Because everything, without his sound, everything collapsed in on him.